based on everything I've read on this topic, my belief is that all the pyramids of the Giza Plateau, so the Great Pyramid, Pyramid of Khafre, all of them, were built with a mixed labor force, which was composed of skilled paid laborers or professional workers, specialists that had skills. These would have been the type of skilled laborers that she's mentioning here, which would have been the type of laborers that are mentioned oftentimes in these articles. They are absolutely a thing, and these probably weren't slaves. Actual slave force, so people that were coerced into doing this, and they were slaves for life. These would have probably been used in the quarry pits or doing all sorts of unskilled labor, such as moving stones around, pulling ropes, bringing water, and that sort of stuff. I believe these would have absolutely been slaves. Third, corvée labor, so people that were forced to do this. It's a form of conscription, if you will, by the state, but they were still probably paid, and once their contract ended, then they could return to their free life, so they weren't slaves for life. And you could consider this type of corvée labor as a form of alternative to taxation. So you can do this instead of paying taxes, or if you can't pay taxes. Would these qualify as slaves? Well, I mean, they are forced to do it. They were not happy to do it, like is trying to say this. However, the simple presence of a remuneration, does that make it not a slave? I mean, maybe. It's kind of a matter of definition then. But then again, they will be punished if they try to run away. They will be placed in secure environments. They will be guarded. They will be forced to work the amount of hours that the pharaoh decided. The pharaoh, of course, had complete control over their life or death. Punishment would occur if they don't do things the way they were told. I mean, and not to mention that if they try and run away, they will be punished by turning them into lifelong slaves. So sure, we can put them in a separate category, but it still isn't a flower and rainbows kind of scenario, which seems to be now what BBC and these other articles are trying to paint. Then there would be prisoners of war and foreign conscripts. So people that were imprisoned and they were forced to do this kind of job. 4 types of people, 4 categories. It's a multi-layered situation, and it was probably a very sophisticated system. Tens of thousands of people for decades would have had to be employed in order to produce all the pyramids that we have in the Giza Plateau. And it is really difficult to estimate precisely how many of these would have been slaves, how many, what percentage would have been skilled laborers that were paid and treated well, how many of these would have been instead part of this corvée labor system, and how many of these were prisoners of war that were forced to do this together with the slaves. But the idea that, there are no slaves whatsoever is ludicrous, because we know that the ancient Egyptians did have slaves. We've got legislation that tells us about how these slaves are supposed to be treated. The original idea that we had, these were all slaves and the pyramids were built entirely by slave force, is incorrect. We know that there were skilled laborers and probably a high number of them. Still, we have to be careful not to make counter-categorical statements when now, there were no slaves, slaves didn't exist, no slaves, they don't exist, I don't want to look at the documents, I don't care about the documents that say otherwise, because then we are going to replace a myth with another myth. Continuing to read the BBC Science Focus before we move on to the next article. Today, many of the highly experienced archaeological workmen at the pyramids come from the same region, though they are paid in hard currency rather than prime beef or accolades. I don't know what this has anything to do with it. Building the pyramids was not an easy job. Understatement of the millennia. The skeletons of some of the workmen show that their muscles were under a large amount of strain, but they may not have resented their jobs too much. Yeah, you do it. Even if it's not as... Okay, let's remove for a moment the focus on the actual slaves or prisoners of war, because I mean, yeah, those didn't want to do it and they were forced to do it. Remove those for a moment and let's focus on the actual corvée labor for a second. You are with your family. You're enjoying your life, but the time comes and the pharaoh's guards come to collect you. And by the way, once again, the records show that if you don't go, they will take an equivalent. So if your son is supposed to do it and he doesn't go, they'll force the father to go and work the corvée labor. If the daughter was supposed to do it and she doesn't go, she disappears, she runs away, then the mother is going to have to do it. So it's not like they were lenient about this. They come and collect you. You've got to go. You don't want to, but you have to. Who knows for how long? Maybe you have to do it for a year. Maybe you have to do it for 2 years. I guess it depends on a lot of taxation. I might actually look at the evidence with you one of these days if you you want me to go deeper onto this. But can you imagine you have to do this for a few years every single day? Yeah, they resented it. We know they resented it. People ran away. People ran away. The only ones that I can imagine are the highly skilled ones that are being paid well. It's a job. They don't have to move the stones. They don't have to be there with copper pickaxes trying to get the stones from the limestone quarries. Instead, maybe they are helping with the architectural projects, the designing. Maybe they're even working on the plaster, because do remember that the pyramids originally were white. The pyramids were glittering, in fact. Completely, and unfortunately, this is all gone. What we see today... kind of want to show you this. This is the core. This is the core. This is not what they would have looked like. In fact, you can even see a little bit of the remaining here of how it was covered, but the reality is something like this. And the very bright white limestone, I don't know if that makes me a white supremacist, but here we are. The bright white limestone would have glittered with the sun and kind of creating a sort of sparkling jewel in the middle of the desert. So I can see how the skilled laborers that had to do the final work, or the plastering, or maybe the ones that were still doing preparation of the stones, sure, I mean, they were paid well, probably they were fed well, as we say, and yeah, they were not slaves, they were skilled craftsmen. So I agree that it's wrong to say that the pyramids were just built by slaves. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. Then maybe those, the specialists, might not have resented their job. I'm happy to consider that possibility, but what percentage is it? How many were unskilled slaves? Because they also were part